Hanan. Today's daf is daf Lamed Tet 39, and it's a very exciting daf, like many of these have been, I think. A little confusing, but very exciting and not too long. We are up to the Mishnah on the daf, bottom side of daf Lamed Chet Amud Bet. And the premise of this parak is that it was maybe frequent or not, but the Mishnah makes it sound rather frequent, that people would say to other people, I don't want you to get any hana from me, or I don't want to get any hana from you, right? Either way, you could see reasons why you would say either one, but you're really upset at someone, they really insulted you, their soccer team won, whatever it might be, and you say, I don't want you to get any benefit from me, or vice versa, or they say, I don't want you to get any benefit from me, or you say, I want nothing to do with you, I'm not going to take a penny from you, right? And we saw yesterday that, or 2 days ago, it could even be children, it could even be family members, but it says our Mishnah, let's say you get into the very uncomfortable situation in which you say you don't want to get any benefit from another person, and then that person has a heart attack and they're sick and they're in their room and they need visitors. So can you go visit that person? That's the question of our Mishnah. Is doing bikur cholim considered to be giving someone else hana? Okay. And we're going to see later, this is part of a theme. Of course, it's not later, but we did it already. We had a discussion about if you Asr Hanan someone, can you marry their daughter? That was yesterday. We're going to have a Gemara later, a very famous Gemara, Mishnah, that let's say you're traveling in the desert. There's two people, and one of them is prohibited from giving the other one Hana'ah, and the one guy runs out of food, and there's no one else there, right? So what do you do in that situation? You have to give him food to save his life. Maybe, you have to give him food. What do you do? So we
Right.
said later.
Do you know that Chris Lawrence?
We said later that there we go. We said later that you can't, in that situation, that particular situation in the desert, which is relevant, you'll see why in our Mishnah, you can't actually, if a person can't get hana from me, even if it's a mitzvah to give them food, I cannot give them food directly. What the Mishnah says to do is you should put the food down on a rock and ride away, and then the other person will pick it up. So you can give it to them indirectly. Or as we quoted earlier, you can go to the storekeeper and say, it's a shame that I'm not allowed to give anything to Ralph, right? But here's $20 and Ralph can buy whatever he wants, kind of thing. So you do it indirectly. So that's something we are going to discuss later. The other thing we've already discussed last Shabbos, I think it was last Shabbos together, is the question of Hashavat Avedah. It was last Shabbos or Sunday, which is that we said that you can return his Avedah to him, right? So if a person you're not allowed to get hana from you, but they lost their wallet, and you find it on the side of the road, you're allowed to give it back to them because you're not actually giving them any hana, right? You're just performing a mitzvah. He's benefiting, but it's something that was really already his. So that's called Hashavat Avedah. We had a machloket about it. We seem to conclude that you're allowed to do it. So it says our Mishnah now today with that introduction, Hamudar Hana'ah l'chavero. Person is prohibited in getting hana'ah from his friend. Very unclear whether the person who's prohibited is the visitor or the sick person, right? But someone is prohibited. V'nichnas levakro. You want to go visit them to do bikur cholim. Omeid avalo yoshev. You can stand and inquire about their health, but you can't sit down. Now we're going to discuss tomorrow who, what, why. But that's the first part of the Mishnah. You can visit the sick, but you can only stand, you can't sit. The second part of the Mishnah, which is we're going to discuss today, but I'll go through it in the Mishnah, is that marpeu refuat nefesh. You can heal the person with a refuah of their nefesh, which sounds at HR like a spiritual healing. Avalo refuat mamon, but you can't do refuah of mamon. So the Gemara understands what this means. Is refuat nefesh means their physical healing, not spiritual. And refuat mamon means healing they're fixing their car, right? Healing their animal. So you can be a veterinarian, but you could be a medical doctor, right? That's how the Gemara understands refuat nefesh and refuat mamon. There's a very interesting, of course, discussion. Again, this is not today's daf, in the Yerushalmi that's quoted by all the Rishonim here about what's the situation. Obviously, if the person's sick and they're dying and they made a neder, you can still heal them, right? There's no. I mean, at the very least, it's like the Gemara puts it in Yerushalmi. It's like Hashavat Avedah, right? If you can give him back his wallet, you can give him back his health. So why is that an issue? So there's a discussion about sometimes doctors get paid, it turns out, sometimes they don't. So that's one of the discussions. The other question the Gemara points out in Yerushalmi, and this is how it seems to be Paskin, I think, at least according to the Rishonim, is that it's talking about a situation where there's another doctor, there's another veterinarian in town. So meaning they don't need you to heal themselves or to fix their animal. They can find someone else, and then if they're asur and hanat to you, you're not allowed to do it if it's the animal, if it's refuat mamon, but you are allowed to do it refuat nefesh, and this is where the Yerushalmi makes a very important point, which, as I was saying before, is very important in my career, which is that even if there's two doctors who know how to treat something, there's no guarantee that they're equal, right? So it's very likely that what one can do, another one can't do. So there, as the Gemara puts it, it's not everyone is zocheh to get a healing from every person, right? So that there is a personal, it's not just knowledge, it's not just take that medicine. There's an important personal connection, and therefore a person's allowed to do it even if they're asur b'hana'ah. But that's the refuah. The first part of the Mishnah is referring to Bikur Choli. So it says the Gemara today, on top of Daf Lamed Tet, B'maya Skina. So what's the scenario here, right? Someone who we're going to call the visitor, the Bikur, Mivaker, sorry, goes to visit a sick person, a Cholet, right? So it says the Gemara, I b'shenichsei Mivaker asurin al HaCholet, right? One possibility is that the possessions of the visitor, the Mivaker, are prohibited on the Cholet. So this guy is sick. He said that you can't get anything. He is not allowed to benefit from the visitor. The visitor comes, that seems to be giving him hana'ah, right? Because you're visiting him, you make someone feel better when you visit them. Says the Gemara, well, it's not true, because going to do Bikur Cholim means I'm going, let's say I'm the Mivaker, I'm fulfilling my mitzvah of Bikur Cholim. The person feels better mimela, meaning it's a consequence of my mitzvah, but I'm not actually physically giving him anything. I'm not, giving him food in this case. I'm not handing him anything. So that shouldn't be prohibited. And then afilo yoshev nami. Why can't the visitor sit down, right? Why would it be allowed to stand because I'm not giving him anything? Let me sit down. I'm not giving him anything. If it's the opposite case, where the nichsei choleh or surah mevaker, the guy who's sick said, I don't want you to ever come to my house or get anything from me, right? So then, why is the guy allowed to visit him? Afilo omei namilo. You can't walk into his house, right? You're getting benefit from his home, from his heat. I don't know. You're standing there. So why is standing any better? Amar Shmuel, the case is the olam kishenichzei mevaker cholet. The possessions of the visitor are prohibited on the sick person. So then why can't you visit him and sit down? It's talking about a situation where they used to pay people to visit the sick, right? Which makes sense. But they only paid people if you were going to sit down. But if you went to visit someone and you just stood there and waved, which is, in one way to visit people, they didn't pay you. But if you sat down and chatted with them, spent some time, then you would get reimbursed by the Bikur Cholim Society. And so I'm talking about a situation where you basically cost money. Now, the visitor says to the sick person, I don't want your money, which is the case we assume by Shabbat Aveda too. And since he owes him, say, $20 for making a visit, and the visitor says, I don't want the money, he's basically gifting $20 to the Choleh.
The Choleh
is prohibited from getting it. I'm sorry?
The Choleh has to pay for the visitors?
Choleh has to pay for the visitor, correct.
That's no hana'ah.
Well, it was convention in that society. Maybe they didn't have a lot of visitors, so they made it takana. But if someone comes to visit you in the hospital or wherever, they didn't have hospitals.
You have to pay them?
You have to pay them, just like a Shabbat Aveda. It's the same discussion, right? The Shabbat Aveda was that you'd have to pay a person who puts the effort in to return your Aveda. So there were places where they had a takana that if someone comes for a proper visit, which means they sit down, you got to pay. And therefore, if you have to pay, and the visitor says, oh, I don't want your money, then he's basically giving you money. So that's the problem. So that is the case. Now, says the Gemara, as we asked several times already, my Pascha, so why did our Mishnah just say it this way, right? Our Mishnah just said, you can stand but not sit. Why did it assume we're going to understand all these details? Says the Gemara, that's the Chiddush, Hakamash Malan. The point of our Mishnah is that you're going to have this discussion, and you're going to understand that af b'makom shenotin schar yeshiva ba'i l'mishkal al amidah lo ba'i mishkal. Sorry, in the place where they give schar, they only give it for sitting down, but they don't pay for standing up. Meaning, even if the society rules are that visitors get paid, that means a proper visit. But if you do a flyby visit, you don't get paid. Now, just to be clear, nothing in the Gemara says it has to do with time, right? I said time. It seems to have to do with how comfortable you are, how much you're in their presence, standing and sitting. So that's what's permitted and not.
I had a visitor like that. I'd say, don't bother to sit down. Thanks for the visit. Just keep standing. Don't sit down. Because then I'd have to pay them if they sat down. Right? So just
make sure. Can I make sure there are no chairs?
Yeah, make sure there's no chairs. Take the chairs away.
But some people want the visitor, so they want them to sit down.
Not if it's a paid visit. I mean, I want my friends to visit, and I'm not paying them to visit.
So I think that but the same. It's the equivalent of Shabbat Aveda, right? There's a mitzvah of Bikur Cholim. It's not. You're right. It is a different thing if someone's friends visit.
No, I want to get my wallet back. I'd pay to get my wallet back, but
what if everyone thought you were contagious, so no one was going to visit?
Right. Sure. Then you got to pay people. Ibai Dema, or the other answer is Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim. We're going to see Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim in a couple dapim that there's a Gzeira Shema Yishet. We're worried that according to Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim, you're allowed to visit because you're just doing a mitzvah, even if they pay you. The problem is that because you can get money for a mitzvah, right? The problem we're worried about is that you're going to go overboard, right? They paid for a half hour, but you're going to get caught up in conversation and stay for an hour. And that's extra, right? And that's the hana you're giving them. But the Amidah says, so that's why you can't sit down, because the first half hour would be okay, but it's that you might stick around a little bit longer. So ask the Gemara, why don't you worry that you're going to stand there for 2 hours?
I have to pay by the hour if they come to visit?
No, they get paid for a visit. But the point is you might do more than the
flat fee?
Flat fee, I think. Amidah hachanami gzeira shema yisha. Sorry, where am I? Gzeira shema yisha ba'amidah hachanami gzeira shema yisha b'yeshiva. As we're going to see later, there's a gzeira that you might stay too long. That's the first answer of the Gemara. So that the issue is where the person who's sick is the one who's not allowed to get benefit from the visitor. And we're worried that the visitor will either forgive the money if you sit down or stay too long. But Ula says it's the opposite. The olam kishenichse chola asurin al mevaker. It's where the visitor is not allowed to get any hana. And so how can I go into your house? Let's say I'm the visitor. I'm asur b'hana'ah from you. I can't walk into your house. Ukigon delo adre min chiyuta. The Ran doesn't like these words at all, but the Gemara has them. The Ran says you really shouldn't read these words, but that what it means is that if let's say Ruvain says to Shimon, I am really angry with you. I don't want you to come into my house. I don't want you to get any benefit from me. But then Ruvain, as I said, Ruvain, right? Then Ruvain has a heart attack. So now he wants Shimon to come visit him. Shimon's not gaining from coming to his house. He is gaining because he gets to go to his house. But Ruvain wouldn't want to make a neder in these circumstances. So the words of the Gemara are, you don't make a neder about your own life. Meaning Ruvain wanted Shimon not to get benefit from him, but if it's benefiting Ruvain, he never made the neder in that case. So this is the Ran's interpretation, that it's basically an imaginary clause in the neder that I don't want you to get any benefit from me, but if it benefits me, I wouldn't mind, kind of thing. It says, well, if that's the case, why don't you sit down? So because you have to do the minimum that you're allowed to do. So the minimum of visiting is standing, and that's all that's permitted. So that is the machloket between Shmuel, I guess, in the first case, and is that right? Shmuel? Yeah, Shmuel and Ula in the second case. Meitve. Now, what about the following brayta? There's a Tosefta that's quoted, that all the Mishnah quote as well. Tosefta that basically follows our Mishnah. And part of the Tosefta says the following. Chalahu nichnas levakro. If a person swore off from having hana'ah from another person, and that person gets sick, you're allowed to go visit him. But if his son gets sick, then you're not allowed to go visit. Sha'alo b'shuk. You can just stand on the outside and ask, how's his son doing? You're not allowed to go into the house and visit. Okay? So now, Bishlama le'ula, that makes a lot of sense. In Ula's case, the visitor is the one who's not allowed to go to the house of the sick person. But if the sick person wants the visitor to come, then he didn't make a neder in that case. So you can go visit the sick person, but you can't go visit their son in the house because the son didn't make the neder, right? The son wasn't party to this at all. So therefore, the visitor is not allowed to go into the house. But according to Shmuel, it doesn't make any sense. Shmuel said the opposite way, which is that as long as you're not getting paid, right, and you don't get paid for standing, right? You should go visit the guy, but why do you go visit his son? You're not getting paid to go visit the son, right? So it says the Gemara Bishlama Lula, who said the Amar B'shenichsei Chola Asir Al Mevaker, it's where the visitor is not allowed to go into the house. Then it's because he's allowed to visit the sick person. The person didn't make a neder for his own life, Shapir, but he made a neder for his son. Or not for his son, but he didn't exclude his son. Shmuel says the opposite case. The Amar that the nichse mivvaker asur al cholet, that it's the visitor who's prohibited from giving hana'ah, or the sick person who's prohibited from getting hana'ah from the visitor, and you're allowed to visit the person because visiting is not considered giving hana'ah. So ma'ishnahu, ma'ishna beno. If you can visit him, you should be able to visit his son. Amar lecha, Shmuel would have to tell you, you're right, that our Mishnah, matnitin, which made a difference between standing and sitting, is my case. It's where the visitor says that I are not allowed to give hana'ah to the choleh, but visiting him is not considered hana'ah. But the Braita is a different case. The Braita is k'shenichsei choleh asurin ala mevaker. The Braita would have to be the opposite case, where the person who is prohibited is the visitor. And since the visitor is prohibited from coming to the house, right, he's allowed to visit the person who made the neder, because the neder would have presumably excluded someone who was visiting him when he's sick, but not exclude his son. And so you can't visit the house in order to visit the person's son, because you are prohibited from going into the house. Ask the Gemara, it's a little strange, according to Shmuel, to say that the Mishnah is talking about one, way, and the Braita, which follows it, is another way. So my paska. So why did you change, basically, or what makes us change that? Amar Rava, because Shmuel matnitin kashita. Shmuel was bothered by the detail in our Mishnah, which is my area the Tani Omeid Avalo Yoshev. Right. So I didn't, because the Braita, remember, talked about a person and his son. It didn't say anything about standing or sitting. But in our Mishnah, it said you're allowed to visit them if you stand, but you're not allowed to visit them if you sit. So what's the difference? Right? Why would there be a difference? That's why Shmuel feels that he's forced to say that the Mishnah is referring to a case where the person who's prohibited in Hana is the sick person. So the question is, when someone comes and visits him, is he giving him Hana'ah? And the answer is he's only giving him Hana'ah if he otherwise would have to pay for it. And you only have to pay when they sit down. So you're allowed to visit as long as you stand up. So that is the Shmuel's opinion. Most say we pass like Shmuel because Rava explained the Mishnah according to him. And so you're allowed to visit as long as you're not getting paid. But if you're getting paid, then it's a problem. Okay? I don't think we pay people nowadays. We should. Amar Reish Lakish. Now, once you're on the topic of visiting sick people.
Shiva visits, we're not there yet.
Sorry, what?
Do a Shiva visit, like.
So the Yerushalmi, I believe, well, no, it's interesting. The Yerushalmi, the Tosefta, which I kept quoting, which the Gemara quoted, doesn't talk about Shiva. That's a very interesting question. I don't know the answer. The Tosefta talks about a dead person. If a person's Asur B'Hana'ah, can you go? And the Tosefta says, I think someone quotes it here. Let me just try to find the language. Anyways, what the Tosefta says, I'll find it somewhere, is that you can pay for an aron, for tachrichin, because ein hana'ah l'meitim, right? There's no problem of giving hana'ah when a person is no longer alive. It doesn't say anything about Shiva, though. It's a good question. I don't know the answer to it.
Right. Well, you would be giving hana'ah to the dead person, be giving hana'ah to the people who are sitting Shiva.
Right. So you're saying if you're prohibited from going to the home, I mean, I assume it would be very similar. When the mitzvah of Shiva is not, the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, as we're going to see in a second, is at least a remez in the Torah. Right. Shiva is a little bit less of a remez.
Right. Okay.
Amar Reish Lakish. Well, that's a good segue. Third line from the top. Remez li Bikur Cholim in Torah minayin. Where do we have a reference in the Torah to Bikur Cholim? Shenemar. So the Gemara brings a very interesting pasuk from Parshat Korach. Right, when Korach was when Moshe was really angry at the whole group, Datan Aviran and the whole group, he said to Hashem, or he prayed, Im kemot kol adam nimutun ela, if these people die a normal death, right, like every other person, ufkudat kol adam yipaket, and they get visited like everyone else gets visited. Kidat. So what's that referring to? My mashma, what does that How do you learn from there? Bikur cholim. Amar Rabba, because this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. Im kimot kol ha'adam yimutun ela. If these, rebellious people die like everybody else, how do most people die? They get sick. They have an event and they're in bed, right? And people come to visit them. So where am I? Right? Most people, they get sick and they're confined to their bed. Right? And people come to visit them. So that's what Moshe was saying. If they get sick and everyone comes to be poked them, then Hashem didn't send me, right? And obviously that's not what happened. They fell into the ground, right? So that was the whole remez there. So you see clearly from there, that the normal nature of the world is that when people get sick, other people come to visit them, right? So that's the reference to Bikur Cholim. Where am I? So then, if that's what happens, then say God didn't send me. Of course, that's not what happened. And Hashem listened to Moshe and made a new creation and swallowed them up into the ground.
Don't we have that in Abraham? I mean, isn't that the classic story? I mean, how come it didn't cite that?
Good question. So, that's our understanding of the classic story, but I guess it's a little bit less of a direct proof that that's why Hashem came. Hashem came predominantly to give news that Sarah was going to have a baby and that Sodom, we have a lot of midrashim, I agree.
The angels aren't commanded by the Torah to do any mitzvah, and we say that those anshim were angels.
Okay, fair enough. But God was also talking to him. But yes, Darash Rava. Now Rava says, while we're on the topic of Korach, right? What did Moshe say? In Bria Yivra Hashem. If Hashem makes a new creation to get rid of Korach, what was Moshe saying? In Bria Gehenom. If God already made hell and they can get swallowed up there, mutav. Right? Tia. That's good. That's a good solution for them. In Lav Yivara Hashem. Moshe was saying, if not, God should create it. Meaning, if Hashem has already had the place deep down where they can go, that's where they should go. If not, Hashem should create something like that. What are you talking about? That Moshe didn't know. Eini, that Gehenom was not created. I don't know how to translate Gehenom, but the Gehenom was not created. But Tanya, there's a Braita, which of course Moshe Rabbeinu probably knew, that says, I'll explain it, the Ran explains it, Shiv'ad Dvarim Nivru Kodem Shnivra Olam. There are 7 things that were created before the general creation. The Ran understands that to mean that these are 7 things that are so indispensable for creation that the world could not have been created without them. And we're going to see one of them is Gehenom. So how can Moshe have been unsure if God already made Gehenom? What are the 7 indispensable things? You ready? Elohim, Torah, Tshuva, Gan Eden, right? Torah, the capacity to do Tshuva, Gan Eden, Gehenom, Kisei HaKavod, whatever that means, Kisei HaKavod, God's, I don't know how to translate Kisei HaKavod either, but literally means the exalted, the respected chair, I guess. Ubeit HaMikdash, Ushmo Shel Mashiach. These are the 7 things, the name of Mashiach, the 7 things that were fundamental to creation that the world cannot have been conceived of before these things already existed. Again, I don't know what existed means here, but were thought, needed, were essential to exist. How do you know all? So now the Gemara is going to bring from the Braita all the proofs. Torah. How do you know that the Torah has to be original, meaning it has to be there before the world? Because it says in Mishlei, Hashem kanani reshit darko. The pasuk is referring to Torah, that Hashem established me at the beginning of the derech, meaning reshit. Torah was there way back in the beginning. Tshuva, how about tshuva? Dichtiv. B'terem harim yuladu atchol eretz mo. Right, we read this all the time, but he talks about tshuva in the Mizmar on Shabbos, Tfilah Moshe, of before the mountains were born, there was already capacity for tshuva. And sorry, because it ends over there, Teshov Enosh Adaka, right? That you punish, a person comes back to Shuvah, a person comes back. Gan Eden, how do you know that Gan Eden was there? Dichtiv, that's in Breshit, it says, Vayita Hashem Elokim Gan Be'eden Mikedem. So that the Gan in Eden was there from Kedem here means before, of course in Torah it can mean east, right? But it means before here, the Gan was there before. Gehenom, how do you know about Gehenom? Dichtiv, because the pasuk here in Yeshayahu is referring to Gehenim, among other things, punishment of evil. It says, Ki eroch mi etmol tifta. It's longer than yesterday, meaning the seduction and the punishment of Rishayim goes back all the way to time. That's how we learn from the word aroch. Kisei hakavod. How about the chair of honor? Dichtiv nachon kisacha me'az. Your chair was established from back then. Again, az is very general. We're understanding to mean from the beginning of time. Beit HaMikdash, similar thing. Dichtiv kisei kavod marom me'rishon. The holy chair. I'm not sure why we didn't bring this pasuk for kisei hakavod. It sounds it's kisei hakavod, but the Beit HaMikdash was the holy thing from the beginning, rishon, from the start. And the final one was Shmo Shel Mashiach, Dichtiv, because it says Yehi Shmo Le'olam, that this was his name from forever, right? So all of these things were there before the world was creation. So now why do we bring that to God? Because we're questioning Moshe. Moshe said to God,
It doesn't give the name of Mashiach here.
but right, well, in the Tehillim it does, right? 1 second, let me just clarify. The name of Mashiach is the name of Mashiach, meaning it doesn't, the point is that there's a defined Mashiach. There is a named Mashiach. We don't know their name, but their name, that's what it's called, Yehi Shmo Le'olam. Their name is known forever.
Isaiah 45 says it's Koresh.
There's other psukim too, right?
Sorry, I'm causing trouble there. Keep going.
But the question is back to Korach. So Moshe said to God, if you didn't create this, I want you to create this. So if it's referring to Gehinnom, how did Moshe knew that Gehinnom was an essential part of the world? So what was Moshe saying to God? Elahachi kama. This is what Moshe was saying. Ivrile puma mutav. God made Gehinnom, but it doesn't mean that there's a way to get there, right? There are things that exist that you can't achieve. So maybe there's a place for punishment, but it's not accessible to living people or to contemporary people, whatever the reason is. So if it has a mouth, meaning if there's an entry point, good. In love, Yivra Hashem. So Moshe was asking Hashem to create an entry to Gehinnom for a direct transfer of the Anshe Korach. Says, well, that's not possible either. It's very selective use of psukim here, right? But it says in Kohelet, right? There's nothing new. So God can't make something new after the world was created. You're right. God can't make a new entrance or won't make a new entrance. But Ihachi, what he's saying the following: Ihacha lo mikrav puma lehacha likrav. Meaning, if the entrance to Gehinnom is in Cambodia, and they were not in Cambodia, let's just move it over, because that's not a new thing. That's a little extension from what already exists. So Moshe was asking God if it was accessible to get Korach swallowed up at that point. Anyways, I'll just continue as if that's a normal conversation. Okay, Darash Rava. Now, Rava Darshan, the Amrila Amr Rav Yitzchak, some said it was Rav Yitzchak. My dichter, there's a pasuk in Habakkuk, which probably most of us are not very familiar with, and I'll include myself in that category. But the Ran provides some context that Habakkuk is talking about he's sort of giving a narrative, according to the Ran. I can't remember Habakkuk very well, but that he's giving a narrative of the history of the Jewish people. They left Mitzrayim, they went through the Yam Suf, and then the pasuk says, and this is the pasuk we're quoting, Shemesh Yareach Amad Zvula, that the sun and the moon stood in Zvula. Now, the Ran reminds us, if you forgot from Masechet Chagigah, that we talked about the different layers of the sky, and there's a layer called Rakia, which we think of, and above that, closer to the Kisei HaKavod, wherever that may be, is a level called Zvula. So Zvula is like the sub-atmosphere or something, or the the higher up atmosphere. So ask the Gemara now, what the heck are Shemesh v'Yareach v'Zvul my b'inyan? What are Shemesh and Yareach doing in the Zvul? We said that they were placed, the Torah says, that Hashem made the Shemesh and the Yareach and placed them Barakia Shemayim, right? So their place is in the Rakia. What are they doing up in the Zvul, which is higher up? And again, I don't know if higher means an up and down layout, but more elevated. So my Habarakia Kavi, they were established in the Rakia. Melami, so this must be what happened. That we're talking about the story of Korach. And Korach and his people are starting up with Moshe. And the sun and the moon got very angry. So they went to visit God. Right? Milamed, this is what only way to read this passage, right? Milamed, where am I? Sha'alu shemesh v'yareach mirakia lizvul. the Shemesh Yareach took a break from their station in the Rakia, and they went up to the Zvul, which is somehow closer to Hashem. But Amru lefanav, and they said, Ribono shel olam, Imatao said din with Ben Amram, if you do justice for Ben Amram and you get rid of these no goodniks, anu meirim, we're gonna do our job. We'll turn the lights on. V'imlav ein anu meirim, we're going on strike, right? If you don't take care of Moshe Ben Amram, we're not participating. We're signing out. Ein anu meirim. So the next pasuk, this is a quote from the next pasuk. V'tasha yareh bahen chitzim v'chanitot. It says the next that God threw arrows and swords at them, right? Why? Amar lahem, Hashem said to them, B'chol yom v'yom, look, every single day of creation, mishtachavim lachem, there's people who come and bow down to you, who reject God's kingship, I don't know, primacy, and bow down to the sun and the moon. It's a very popular source of idol worship, right? But you guys don't get upset. No one comes complaining that you're going to destroy things if they don't do anything. Atem meirim, you turn on the lights as regular. So b'chvodi lo mechiten, God says, when it destroys my kavod, when people question my kavod, you don't object. Kvod basar v'dam mechiten, right? But every day, so for Moshe, you're gonna object. So therefore, b'chol yom v'yom yorim ben chitzin v'chanitot u'meirin, and how do you know that every day they do it? Shenemar l'or chitzecha yahalecha. The pasuk continues and says that even though there are arrows pointed at you, you still continue to go. So basically, God got angry at them. That's how we understand the pasuk in Habakkuk, that they were standing up for Moshe in Korach, and which was not inappropriate. But the fact that they only stood up for Moshe and didn't stand up for God, and they threatened to go on strike, God thought was inappropriate and threw arrows at them. Okay. Tanya, now back to our Gemara. So enough of Korach for a second. Tanya says the Braita, we're at the second line, and this is also very important halacha. Bikur cholim ein lashir. The mitzvah of visiting the sick has no measurement. Now, what the heck does that mean? What does it mean it has no measurement? My ein lashir. So Savar Rav Yosef Lamemer, Rav Yosef thought it meant ein shiur lamatan schara, that there's no way to quantify the reward. Right? It's an unquantifiable thing. There's no, you get this much brownie points, this much credit. It's an not infinite, but unquantifiable reward. Amrle Abaye, so Abaye said to him, well, that's not very unique to Bikur Cholim. Kol mitzvah miyesh shiur lamatan schara. Did anyone, no one knows how much schar you get for any mitzvah. There's no set amount that you do a certain mitzvah, you get X number of credit.
You were paying them.
That's a good point, but that's not how he understands shiur.
$20 or something for the mitzvah, you know.
Correct, that is a shiur. It says in Bahatznan, but the famous Mishnah in Avot, which everyone knows, Havi Zahir b'mitzvah kala b'kichamura, right? The first Mishnah in the second parak. Be careful with the mitzvah that's kala, right? A light mitzvah, like speaking Hebrew or the Rambam's example, right? But a mitzvah kala kibachamura, like the most severe thing. Because you never know what you can't say this one's an important mitzvah, this one's not an important mitzvah. You can't determine what the schar is. So that's not anything unique about Bikur Cholim. El Amar Baya, what it means is afilo gadol etzel katan. What it means ein lashir is that there's no proportionality. There's no like, oh, wait a second. I can't visit that person because I'm too great or too low. The Bikur Cholim has nothing to do with the strength of the person, right? Or the value or the greatness of the person. Even a great person has a mitzvah of Bikur to visit even the smallest and least important people. And that's a practical halacha. Rava says it means a different thing. It means that you can't say there's a mitzvah Bikur Cholim, so I'll go tomorrow, right? If the person would benefit from 10 visits, you got to visit them 10 times. Afilu mea pamim bayom. There's no sheer, meaning there's no like you go once like, you go to a Shiva house and you did it. You were Yotze, right? Which is not true, I assume, by Shiva house either. But my point is, it's not, sometimes you get that feeling like I check the box. There's no sheer, right? Bikur Cholim has to do with the need of the person. If the person would benefit or needs more visitors or needs you to come 20 times, you go 20 times if you can, right? So that's what it means, ein lo sheer. Amar of Acha Bar Chanina, a very famous Gemara, of course, but a very important one. Kol mevaker choleh, anyone who visits a sick person, notel echad mishishim micholyo, there's different girsaot here. We say bitzaro, You take 1/60th of their pain or 1/60th of their illness. So visiting a person takes away some of their illness. So of course, what he said to him was Amrilay. So he said back to him. It's not clear who said back to who. Some of the Gersi here Amrilay Abai Rava. In came li alun shitin velukma. So I got a solution. Every time someone is sick, gather 60 people together. They'll go visit him. Each one gets 1/60th of the illness, and he'll be better. To cure anything. Brilliant, right? So Amalei said, no, I don't think you understand how this proportionality works. It's ki isuraita de be Rebbe. It's talking, well, it's two problems. First of all, it's like the 10th that Rebbe talked about. We're gonna discuss the Gemara in a second. We had this in Ketubot very recently. Now remember that there's a condition that if a man dies, his daughters get 1/10 of his estate, right? So we had a question in Ketubot, what if you have 10 daughters? So all the money goes to the daughters, each one gets 1/10. So we explained that the first one gets 1/10 of the estate, the second one gets 1/10 of what's left, the third one gets 1/10 of what's left. But that's how proportions work. So the same thing is true by the Bikur Cholim. The first person takes away 1/60th. The second one takes a 60th of what's left. The third one takes a 60th of that kind of thing. So 60 people does not equal 60 60ths. It equals, Charlie could do the math for me, but it equals a smaller percentage.
But you would never get to zero. That's the point.
Never get to zero. Right? Exactly. So again, what this exactly means, because it sounds like even 10% of an illness is better than 100%, but that's the Gemara. So it's that. And the other issue is that it's not true that everybody who visits takes 1/60th. It's specifically people who are close to you, the Ben Gilo, the same type as you. Now, what does Ben Gilo mean? It's really not clear. We always translate it as person who has the same. Some people translate it as the same birthday. That's not how we translate it here, but the same mazal, the same, you're born under the same sign, maybe also the same year. Like, Ben Gilo, sometimes we use it to refer to actual twins, right? You're exactly the same in the mazal. So anyways, it's not every person. So you can't just gather 60 random people and get them together. Now, let's just remind you of the case of Rebbe. The Tanya Rebbe Omer, Bat hanizonot michse achim, a daughter who's getting hana'ah from the brothers, meaning because the father died, left the estate for the daughters and the sons, they're notlot isur nechasim. They get 1/10 of the estate. Amrullah the Rebbe, so they said to Rebbe, well, that could be really problematic. It's varecha mishiyesh lo eser banot uben echad uben ein lo leben makom banot klum. If you have 10 daughters and one son, and then the father dies, the daughters are going to be so well taken care of, but the poor son is going to get nothing. Amar Lem, so he said, no, that's not what it means. Mishonah notlot isur nechasim. The first one to collect, not clear who's the first one, maybe the oldest, but not necessarily. The first one gets 1/10 of the estate. Shnia gets 1/10 of what's left, which would be 9%, I guess, in this case. Right, but Mash Shiar gets 1/10 of what's left. Shlishit gets Mash Shira, what she left, etc. Then, of course, at the end, whatever's left, I don't know, again, 10% or times 10, I don't know what's left, Charlie, but maybe you know. But whatever's left, let's say 30% is left or 40%. The rest, Chozrot v'Cholkot b'Shaveh, they split that evenly, including the son, of course, who gets the portion. So
if there are 10 daughters, there's about 35% left.
Yeah, there we go. It's close. Okay. So anyway, so that is the case of the choles. So you can't quite take away a person's entire illness by having 60 visitors, but the reminder, you can take away some of it by having visitors. So Bikur Cholim is an important mitzvah, obviously. It's a great mitzvah. There's no shear. There's no limit to it, no matter how great a person is. And having said that, if a person is asur b'hana'ah, you can still go and visit them, because visiting a person is not considered giving hana'ah directly, because you are just doing your mitzvah and they happen to gain from it. But it's the same thing as doing either not necessarily returning their avedah, but about giving them something which they gain memela, not through your act, but through a sort of a passive thing that happens. We're going to stop there. Tomorrow we're going to get to the story of Chelbo, who got sick and needed some visitors. But I don't want to start it because tomorrow's daf is not so long, so I want to leave something to learn.
So
In today's world where we don't pay, can you sit down?
Even if you're asur b'hana'ah or not asur b'hana'ah.
If you're asur b'hana'ah.
In the Mishnah's case.
So in the Mishnah's case, if you are in a place where they don't pay, then you can sit down, correct?
The thing about Bikur Cholim not having a fixed measure, that's not one of the things listed as having no fixed measure in that Mishnah from Peah that we read every morning.
Yes,
It's
it is.
listed in the next passage, which is different,
It
but
is. It
having a
is.
different characteristic.
It is, Charlie, it is.
But
No, it's
we
not.
add it- in our tefillah, we add it, but in the Mishnah, it's not there, right? There's different versions of that.
Mishnah,
Right,
but-
it's not in that Mishnah.
It's not in the Mishnah, but we do quote it. So there's a brighter that does quote it.
Right.
But the other thing is that sometimes the English shir in that Mishnah means you have to do it even if it costs you $1 million.
Right, it can
But
go
that-
the other way.
That we're not understanding it that. We're understanding that that you're not done, but it's not so that you spend all your money.
Yeah, the Mishnah is in Peah, which,
Right.
although the rabbis made a decree about it couldn't be just one stalk of
Right.
wheat. You could actually get away with Peah with like a single stalk of wheat on the corner. But the rabbis said you had to give a little more.
A little more. Okay, everyone. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov,
Nick, we could do 7:30 p.m. tomorrow if that's okay with this crowd.
works for me.
James is not a big fan, but we're going to do it. So I just want to make two other comments since we have the group. So in 2 weeks, on the first day of Hanukkah, we have to do the morning, for me at least. I can't do the
Yeah,
evening.
that's fine. That's good for
Um,
me also.
And then I'm going to be away the next Shabbat. So we'll talk about it. But Shabbat Hanukkah, we're going away. So we'll figure out that week. I know that
That's the weekend of New Year's?
that's the weekend of Christmas.
Okay.
December 24th, I think, is Shabbos. So I'll be
Right,
away.
right.
Away. So I'll be here New Year's. So I don't know if everyone else will be, but I plan to be around. Okay.
I plan to work on December 25th.
Okay. It's a Monday, right? No, it's a Sunday. It's a Sunday. Okay, everyone. Shavua Tov.
Thank you. Shavua Tov.
7:30.
7:30 tomorrow.
Good night.